Unless you are someone who's worked in the food cart business or happens to be involved in logistics or buses or some other industry that uses a lot of commercial vehicles, you've probably not heard about the Workhorse Group. Founded back in the 1980s, it operated for many years as a manufacturer of specialist commercial vehicles like buses and food trucks, based on chassis made by mainstream truck manufacturers. Then, just under a decade ago, it was involved in the construction of the Navistar E-Star electric van, a vehicle which was unfortunately ultimately cancelled. After that, it entered more seriously into the clean vehicle segment, first with a plug-in hybrid van, promises of a plug-in hybrid pickup, and more recently, a fully electric range of commercial vehicles. The plug-in hybrid pickup never actually materialised, though. It was showcased as the W15 pickup at a couple of auto shows, but just over 2 years ago, Steve Burns, serial entrepreneur, co-founder and former CEO of Workhorse Group, spun off a new company by the name of Lordstown Motors. Through an agreement with Workhorse, it acquired all of the intellectual property for the pickup, using it as the basis to design an all-electric truck called the Lordstown Endurance. In the last couple of weeks, Lordstown has been in the news headlines for all the wrong reasons. Last month, a prototype Lordstown Endurance pickup caught fire during its very first public road test. Then, late last week, Hindenburg Research published a damning report on the company, something which this week seems to have now led to an investigation by the US Securities and Exchange Commission into Lordstown. And while Lordstown appears to be continuing with its pre-sales promotional tour, giving prospective commercial customers across the US the chance to get up close and personal with one of its beta prototypes, its CEO did confirm this week that the SEC is indeed probing the company, which of course then led to a 12% or more drop in the company's share price. If you have watched this channel for a while, you'll know that back in October last year, video is here, I asked rather pointedly, what's the deal with Lordstown Motors? And in light of the information that's been coming out around the company in the last few weeks, I feel we need a follow-up. Will Lordstown actually even make it? As I pointed out then, Lordstown was one of a handful of startups to execute an extremely quick acceleration from its founding to the stock market, made possible by something called a Special Purpose Acquisition Company, or SPAC. I have delved into these before on the channel, but the too long didn't read is that they exist for the sole purpose of providing startups a backdoor to the stock market without forcing them to go through all of the red tape and the checks and balances that come from executing a traditional IPO. They provide investors a way to preemptively secure an investment in a particular market segment without necessarily always knowing which company they're ultimately going to be investing in. Lordstown certainly wasn't the first company to join the stock market last year via a SPAC merger, but it was certainly one of, if not the youngest company to do so. Even Nikola Motor, which became Nikola Corporation after its reverse merger, was older than Lordstown when it floated on the market through a reverse IPO. For a company to enter onto the stock market so soon after its founding without having a whole lot to show for itself should be troubling. And it was for me at the time. Save for a few high-profile events, an official reveal for the Lordstown Endurance pickup involving then US Vice President Michael Pence, and a press call outside the White House with then President Trump, Lordstown really didn't do a whole lot publicly. Yet, what we were told, and something that Hindenburg Research picked up on, was that Lordstown had weighty order books and letters of intent to buy its electric pickup. We were told that Lordstown was on track to deliver its first vehicles this year, produced at a former GM production facility in Lordstown, Ohio, using a fully autonomous, state-of-the-art production line. A former GM production facility that Lordstown was only able to buy because General Motors offered it a loan of $40 million. Side note, while that might actually sound like a really bizarre thing to do, I think it was actually a smart move on GM's part. Selling the facility to Lordstown for $40 million, but also being the lender of that money, would, I assume, mean that GM would get to repossess the facility if Lordstown doesn't keep its end of the bargain up. And since land tends to accumulate in value rather than drop, especially in today's market, GM stands to make some money from this deal, whatever happens next. In addition to those concerns, I also remember commenting at the time that Lordstown seemed very reluctant to let journalists near its vehicles. While some of you reached out following our previous video on the subject and told us that yes, you'd seen the vehicles up close and personal and it seemed reasonably okay, not a single journalist I know in this industry, and this industry is very small, have spent any significant time with the Endurance. And while Lordstown is more than happy to send out plenty of press releases to the media, they haven't answered a single question I've sent them about media test drives, vehicle specs, or production. For a company that is due to begin delivering vehicles this fall, that's a pretty big red flag. But that's enough of my past misgivings. Let's see what Hindenburg Research says. The company, run by chartered financial analyst and chartered alternative investment analyst Nate Anderson, is the company that brought Nikola Motors to its knees last year over the fact that Nikola Motors shot and published footage of its Nikola 1 prototype in motion, implying it was moving under its own power when in fact it was being powered by gravity. Good old 9.8 meters per second squared. Anderson, and Hindenburg Research by association, held a short sale position on Nikola, and I'm guessing as a consequence of the Hindenburg report on Nikola, was able to profit greatly from that drop in share price. And as you might expect, Hindenburg also holds a short position on Lordstown. This means that it's betting on Lordstown's stock falling in its share price, and for short sellers to earn money, because they need the stock to go down, not up. Some people might ask if it's illegal for Hindenburg Research to publish a report on Lordstown that shows the company in a bad light when the resulting drop in share price is exactly what Hindenburg Research needs to make a profit. Some might suggest that's stock manipulation. But what Hindenburg does skirts the border of what's considered acceptable and what's not. It uses publicly available information and independent, verifiable research to pull together the various loose strands and stories surrounding a company to show a very different side of things to the one that the company would want you to see. It's part investigative reporting and, frankly, part common sense. After all, if you were researching a traditional investment, it would make sense to make sure you're really aware of what you're getting into before potentially parting with your life savings. Hindenburg is essentially doing the same thing, but in reverse, from the perspective of someone who wants to make money from shorting stocks. Personally, I should remind you here that neither I nor anyone else on the team holds stocks in companies or we cover, nor are we financial advisors. Don't really like the concept of stock shorting, but it's not illegal, and the practice engaged by Hindenburg is not, so I think it's fair to say it's fair game. As long as the research is well carried out and it's factually correct, that's really all I care about. To Hindenburg's extensive report. Like the report it carried out on Nikola, the Lordstown Report is damning. It claims that Lordstown has no revenue and no sellable product. It alleges investors have been misled, that Lordstown has claimed 100,000 pre-orders that amount to nothing, and cites former employees who allege that Burns is, quote, a con man and a P.T. Barnum-like figure. I don't have time to go in all the claims right now, but let's just pick a few, and add to that what CEO Steve Burns confirmed himself this week. To the orders. Lordstown has consistently talked about its order book of more than 100,000 pre-orders, and those orders are exclusively to the commercial vehicle world right now, as Lordstown isn't accepting private customer orders, only corporate ones. Speaking to former employees and tracking down some of the companies that had allegedly made large orders, Hindenburg alleges and backs up with evidence that most of those pre-orders aren't real. One such deal cited by Hindenburg involved 14,000 trucks from E Squared Energy, a deal worth a claimed $735 million. But on investigating the company in question, Hindenburg discovered that the E Squared Energy company, based out of an apartment in Texas, doesn't even have a vehicle fleet. Another $52.5 million order was alleged to have come from a two-person startup operating out of a managed virtual office. In that case, the person whom Hindenburg spoke to said that they had no intention of ordering any vehicles and that the pre-order was just a marketing relationship. In fact, none of the companies listed by Hindenburg as being called serious orders by Lordstown have any intention of placing an order. Worse, a small consulting firm called Climb to Glory confirmed to Hindenburg that it was paid to generate pre-orders, stating that, quote, the faster the pre-orders arrived, the greater investors' confidence would be in the company and the faster funds would flow in. Further, those who had been listed by Lordstown as having made orders confirmed to Hindenburg that they made no legally binding commitments and that, at best, any pre-orders were made with the intention of finding out more information about the pickup truck. Indeed, if you look at the very form that Lordstown made available for potential customers to fill out, it states that it is a non-binding letter of intent. It doesn't require any reservation payments, deposit, or anything other than a signature, although it does include a clause encouraging the filer to issue a press release announcing the deal. Yeah, I just used air quotes because non-binding letters of intent are about as valuable as the paper that they are printed on. Frankly, it's pretty simple. Ask yourself if you'd go from pre-ordering a new car from a brand new startup to committing to buying it if you hadn't even seen it, if you didn't know about it, its specs or anything else. Well, the same is true for businesses. The claims made against Lordstown, though, just keep getting worse. Hindenburg says it has evidence to suggest that Burns left Workhorse after being pushed out for wasting R&D funds and missing promised deadlines. Also, insiders who talked to Hindenburg Research claim that while Lordstown is still maintaining it will be producing vehicles this year, it is 3 to 4 years away from production and doesn't have any of the facilities it needs to make the batteries it said it would. Worse, there's no evidence to suggest that full validation testing has been completed, with several former employees claiming that Lordstown has not completed tests to prove that the vehicle meets the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, or FMVSS. The fact that the first prototype test mule Lordstown pickup to go out onto the public highway caught fire just 10 minutes into its test drive suggests that there's certainly something wrong. Granted, it was an engineering test mule rather than an actual pickup built by Lordstown, but it's still troubling. And while fire can happen to any company, the way that Lordstown has dealt with, or rather ignored, the fire and subsequent police report, which both Hindenburg and others had published thanks to Freedom of Information requests, well, it all just sits a bit weirdly with me. All of the claims made by Hindenburg are backed up with hard, irrefutable evidence that make it look rather terrible for Lordstown. But then there are a couple of other things that we've found out about Lordstown that are worthy of mention. First, Elfane, the company from Slovenia that expected to provide in-wheel motors for Lordstown, appears very much in its early stages of testing with the company. According to Steve Burns, Lordstown has only executed about 20,000 miles of real-world tests so far with those in-wheel motors to date. For a vehicle that is supposedly going to launch this year, that is about 0.1% of the number of miles that a traditional car company puts its vehicles through before they're deemed ready for market. And additionally, 20,000 miles for a vehicle that's being marketed as a fleet vehicle is no more than about 6 months of hard work at best and maybe even a few months at worst. And without operating those tests to million-mile marks, it's almost impossible for Lordstown to offer any kind of long-lasting warranty. Elfane has allegedly carried out 100,000 miles of tests in-house with its motor, but that's in-house with its motors, not with the Lordstown pickup. Since the company is also expected to provide motors to Aptera, I will admit this is concerning me as an Aptera reservation holder, but maybe that's for a future video. The most telling thing, though, is the news that since Lordstown went public in October last year, the executives and directors of Lordstown Motors have unloaded $28 million worth of stock. When your executive team would rather sell their stock over a few months than keep it for its potential future value, there's something really wrong. It's the same vibe I get when I learn that a company executive pays themselves more than anyone else at the company when the company itself is still struggling to balance its books. If you are the boss and you are serious about your company, paying yourself a huge salary should be at the bottom of your list. Making sure your team is well looked after, has all the equipment and materials it needs, and can help you grow and mature the company, that should be far more important. So there you have it. Lordstown Motors, a company that was in Portland today, courting potential customers and acting like everything was fine, at least according to the people I spoke to, is most certainly not fine. If this report wasn't one that was backed up by evidence, I would suggest that it was just the work of someone trying to short stock. But Hindenburg is methodical, and that's the killer blow. And it explains why the SEC is now investigating the company. Watch this space. It's going to get nasty. That's it for today. As always, thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons. That's Raging Fellows, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Sean Ueda, and Tazza in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, and Ian. You can join all of these amazing Patreon supporters by following the link below. You'll also find a link below if you want to send us a tip through Ko-fi or Bitcoin, if you prefer to support us that way. And there's also a link to our Discord chat server, which I should remind you is great fun and completely free to join. So give it a go if you're feeling chatty. And as usual, you'll find everything from t-shirts to face masks and water bottles at our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!